What happens when a liberal professor tries to publicly embarrass a student she dislikes, only to discover she's just challenged a genius? And not just any genius, a certified prodigy with a staggering 170 IQ. Barron Trump. Trust me, by the time you hear this story, your jaw will be on the floor. Let me take you through exactly what happened, but first, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. At one of America's most prestigious universities, Dr. Linda Markham's advanced calculus class had a reputation for two things: her remarkable mathematical intellect and her increasingly blatant political bias. That morning, as students walked into the lecture hall, an unusual tension filled the air. But instead of the usual complex equations, the whiteboard displayed something unexpected, a simple yet striking message. Today's topic: redefining academic priorities. In the back of the room sat a tall, reserved young man, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. Few of his classmates had interacted with him personally. He preferred to keep to himself. But everyone knew who he was: Barron Trump. What they didn't realize was that beneath his quiet demeanor lay a mathematical mind so extraordinary, it was about to shock every single person in that room. Dr. Markham began her lecture, but something about her tone was different. The confidence in her stride felt more aggressive than usual as she paced before the class. Mathematics, she declared, while important, must make space for more pressing social discussions. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats as she continued explaining her balanced curriculum. From the back of the room, Barron slowly raised his hand. Dr. Markham's gaze flickered toward him, her expression tightening slightly. She hadn't anticipated any challenges to her authority today. What started as a discussion about curriculum changes quickly turned into something far more revealing. In today's world, she continued, her voice carrying a condescending edge, we must focus less on abstract theories and more on real-world applications, especially regarding social justice. A weighted silence fell over the room as she pulled up her PowerPoint. But instead of the promised calculus material, the screen displayed statistics on gender representation in STEM fields. Some of you, she added, her gaze lingering on certain students, may need to come to terms with the fact that your privileged position in this class isn't necessarily due to merit. Barron's hand remained raised, steady and patient. Other students glanced at him, then at each other. A few nodded subtly, as if grateful that someone had the courage to speak up. But Dr. Markham ignored him. Instead, she pressed on, her voice taking on a sharper edge. For instance, she said, flipping to the next slide, family connections and wealth often create artificial advantages in education. The implication was crystal clear. A few students turned to see Barron's reaction, but his face remained impassive, his posture composed, his hand still raised. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Markham could no longer pretend to ignore him. Yes, Mr. Trump, she said, her tone laced with amusement and mild irritation. Do you have something to add to our discussion on privilege in education? The room fell completely silent. Everyone knew Barron's reputation, his perfect test scores, his quiet dedication to his studies. They'd seen him tutoring struggling classmates in the library late at night. But nobody, not even the professor, could have predicted what was about to happen next. Barron lowered his hand and spoke, his voice calm, yet deliberate. Dr. Markham, I believe calculus is fundamental to understanding both theoretical and applied sciences. Many of us enrolled in this advanced class specifically to deepen our mathematical knowledge. He paused for a brief moment before continuing. Wouldn't reducing the core curriculum ultimately disadvantage all students, regardless of their background? A few heads nodded in agreement. But Dr. Markham's expression hardened. Mr. Trump, she said pointedly, emphasizing his last name, perhaps you, of all people, should reflect on how privilege shapes education. After all, not everyone had access to private tutors and elite prep schools. The room tensed. Some students held their breath, waiting to see how Barron would respond. But instead of becoming defensive, Barron smiled. You're absolutely right, Professor, he said gently. I have been fortunate in my education. And because of that, I believe we have a responsibility to uphold rigorous academic standards so that every student can reach their full potential. The professor's face flushed. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. "And you think you know more than your own professor about academic standards?" she scoffed. "Tell me, what exactly makes you such an expert on mathematical education?" Barron remained composed. "I'm not claiming to be an expert, Professor. I'm just a student who loves mathematics and believes in its power to transcend political divides." He gestured toward the empty whiteboard. "Rather than debating privilege, wouldn't it be more productive to explore the beauty and complexity of calculus?" The entire class held its breath. Dr. Markham's expression darkened. "Very well, Mr. Trump," she said slowly, striding toward the board. "Since you're so passionate about mathematics, let's put that passion to the test." She began scribbling an equation on the board, one that made several students gasp the moment they saw it. It wasn't just a difficult calculus problem, it was graduate-level material. Something far beyond what any undergraduate class should be tackling. A clear attempt at public humiliation. "Since you're so concerned about maintaining standards," she said with a smirk, "why don't you show us how it's done? Unless, of course, you'd rather talk about privilege instead." The challenge was clear. A student whispered under his breath, "That's impossible." But Barron's expression remained unchanged. His composure? Unshaken. "Of course," he said simply, rising from his seat. "I'd be happy to try." Dr. Markham's smirk widened as Barron walked to the front of the room. She had purposely chosen a problem that required techniques far beyond what she had ever taught. But something about Barron's calm demeanor made her confidence waver just slightly. Taking the marker from her hand, he studied the equation with genuine curiosity, not the fear she had expected. A few students leaned forward in their seats, sensing something big was about to unfold. Then Barron did something no one saw coming. "Before I begin," he said, turning to face the class, "I notice this problem has multiple possible solutions. Would you prefer I use the standard method? Or would you be interested in seeing a more efficient approach, one I learned from Leibniz's original papers?" Dr. Markham's expression froze. "You've read Leibniz's original papers?" she blurted out before she could stop herself. "Yes," Barron replied simply. "In German. The English translations don't quite capture the elegance of his methods." He turned back to the board. "But perhaps," he added, gripping the marker, "we should let the mathematics speak for itself." And in that moment, the real lesson was about to begin.